Germaine Pratt is a big fan of one running back in this year's draft. Plus, we answer your questions. What's the future at tight end, cornerback, running back? Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapien. You can find us on YouTube, or you can subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, or anywhere you get your podcast where you can follow Locked On Bengals and get notified when we upload our content every day. You can join the First Listen Club real easily that way. We're going to dive into some Germaine Pratt words on Twitter about one particular running back in this year's draft class and answer a bunch of your questions in a mailbag pertaining to the rest of free agency. And of course, attention starting to turn a little bit toward the draft here, James. Today's episode brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You can visit ultimate-gm.com or find it in the App Store and get a 100% free boost to your franchise that you'll manage in Ultimate GM using promo code Locked On in all capitals in the game. And let's start with Germaine Pratt's tweet. Responded to you, James, unsolicited, unprompted. You tweeted about a couple of running backs and the Bengals freshly re-signed starting linebacker replied to you.
Yeah, he did. And look, it was simple. Off the heels of our conversation on our Tuesday show, but it was Monday night as we recorded. I'm just thinking about 12.7 million. And that cap hit was just staying with me. And you hear about the devaluation of running backs and how they're devalued, and you can't take one in the first round, and it's all about value. And I'm not even debating that. But I just wanted to point out that if it's about value, what the Bengals are currently doing with Joe Mixon, $12.7 million cap hit, is far worse to me than taking a Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs with the 28th overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. So I pointed it out. And it got, excuse me, wow. It got plenty of steam and picked up. And, well, I guess Germaine Pratt saw it. And he responded with 3 words. Gibbs is crazy. Which I think is an endorsement. Is a, man, that Gibbs kid can catch passes and run at a really high level and do all of the things that he did. And you look at the numbers the past couple of years at Alabama, he certainly was able to put up huge numbers. So we'll see. But and the Bengals met with Gibbs, by the way. So there's that. But Germaine Pratt, fan of the Alabama running back.
He is a pretty fun player. Really evasive running back, fast running back, has drawn comparisons to Alvin Kamara. You wonder about his blocking ability. That's the question with Gibbs. Yeah. And if he is a complete enough back to be an every down NFL back weighing about 200 pounds, a little bit on the small side there, but Alvin Kamara, shades of Alvin Kamara, great in the receiving game, great creating, great cutting, good speed, good agility. It's a pretty fun prospect, pretty tantalizing prospect. I can see why you would call him crazy if you're Germaine Pratt.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the way he plays, is on that spectrum of the things he does on the football field are pretty dazzling.
And if you're the fans that are asking for Austin Eckler, I'm not saying Gibbs is going to be Eckler, but it's that style. It's that pass catcher. He's not a huge frame guy. You mentioned he hovers right around 200 pounds, but that's the style. That's the type of guy you want, where he can catch a bunch of passes and take them to the house, have that home run threat, the speed, all of those things. I clearly the Bengals are interested. They saw something because they met with him at the combine. Do they still have interest? I'm not sure, but certainly Germaine Pratt is at least open to the idea. And clearly my tweet, Jake, was about Mixon. It wasn't about the value of Travion Williams or Chris Evans. It was clearly about Mixon. And so I know Pratt read it, and so I do think it's interesting he responded. I don't think it means anything about how he feels about Joe Mixon, but I do think when you have a linebacker that sees a running back and is a multi-threat like that through the air in the passing game and on the ground, I'm sure he knows that there is some value there. So that's not me saying the Bengals should take Gibbs 28th overall. That's me saying I would much rather that than keep Joe Mixon at a $12.7 million cap hit for 2023.
I think you meet with Gibbs because you're interested at the right point in the draft. If you're the Cincinnati Bengals, I don't know that point is 28. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the mailbag because there was a good question about like what's the ideal order to draft XYZ positions that we'll get to. A lot to like about Gibbs though. 21 years old at the time of the draft. Really good tape, really fun tape, like we've talked about, and has a production that you need to be a productive NFL running back from an analytic perspective. Ran a 4.36, was one of the fastest running backs at the combine. Only Devin Achane, I think, was faster with a 4.32 at the combine, and then Keaton Mitchell ran a 4.37. So a couple guys under 4.4, but Jahmyr Gibbs, talk about explosion at the running back position. Is something you're looking for. You talk about a guy who could come in and complement Mixon if they choose to keep Mixon in some way, shape, or form, which seems to be getting more and more likely. We talked about Damien Harris as the last kind of premium high-end bell cow type runner that was available on the free agent market. He was signed after we put that episode up yesterday, James. And so if Mixon is on the Bengals in 2023, which again, I think is getting more likely the more time passes, Gibbs is a really cool running mate idea for him in terms of a dynamic change of pace back in the transition year that the Bengals often like to do, right? Where they'll bring a running back in and keep their veteran for 1 year before they transition to the new guy.
Is it more likely though? I'm not convinced.
What more
of
likely?
That. Is it more likely that Mixon's there today than he was 2 days ago? Like, I don't. They kept Dalton.
The reason
that's the most recent example is Dalton with similar money. Dalton was a couple million more, 3 or 4 million more, but they kept Dalton and the whole world knew they were taking Joe Burrow.
The reason would be that I'm not saying that he's for sure on the team right now, and maybe they've got a handshake deal. We mentioned that as well. Maybe they've got some foundation in place for redoing the deal a little bit, but they wanted Pirine, right? We know that.
Sure.
They lost Pirine. Do they feel comfortable with no veterans or with Travion Williams being your only veteran, very inexperienced veteran? And they seem to have a preference at some spots anyway of having some veterans around in the room.
Sure. I just think that there are still guys that could still replace Mixon as a runner. It's just the tough part was the pass blocking aspect. Leonard Fournette.
I don't think that he's running as well as Joe Mixon at this point.
Okay. What did Mixon do well at? He caught passes last year. Everything Leonard Fournette did for Tampa, Joe Mixon did, including come off on third downs at times. I mean, it's like 85% of what Mixon brought. They both ran for 800 plus. Fournette played through an injury. Mixon played through an injury. Questionable offensive lines. I
don't think Fournette was as good as Mixon. Not that Kareem I think Mixon was great, but I don't. I don't even want to talk about Kareem Hunt.
Fine, but can those guys do 85% of what Mixon brings? And if so, 12.7 is a lot. I think that's the point. Honestly, you could find guys in the draft that could do what Mixon does as a runner. Probably. And as a pass catcher. It's just the pass blocking part. And that's the part is they prioritize Pirine to me because they need that pass blocker. And that's the weird part. I don't think, to your veteran point, I don't think they would want to rely on a rookie to pass block like that, regardless of where they take him. And so who does that? Because Mixon can't be that veteran, at least to this point. I don't think he's changing now, and they're going to suddenly trust him. So I don't know what they do. I think that's the interesting dilemma here. I don't know if Mixon's more or less likely to come back than he was a week ago. But the number of pass blocking backs that makes sense for them, that's waning. And if that wanes, well, then who do you turn to? Is it Travion Williams? Because it's not Chris Evans. It's not Joe Mixon.
Right now it's Travion Williams. Right now that's their third down back. So do they address that? Probably. might come up in our mailbag a little bit here. Let's transition to that mailbag topic. I'm looking at Leonard Fournette's numbers, though. I think that he's just not as good as Mixon. Anyway.
It's not far off for what they asked them to do, though.
You can save money if you were going to use the money elsewhere. That's the key with all this stuff. If they're going to use the money elsewhere, great. At this point, though, in free agency, you don't shave salary cap just to shave salary cap. So they would have to have a use for that money, and hopefully they would. Anyway, let's dive in to some mailbag questions here, James. Some questions about the draft, some questions about the remainder of free agency, and a question that I'm going to ask you as it pertains to Jonah Williams, bouncing off another Locked On show. We'll get to that coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard us talk all about Ultimate Football GM, and well, you're responsible for controlling your own destiny of your team. Maybe you want to keep Joe Mixon, you want to renegotiate with your star running back. You can do that. You get to go through season by season, lead your team to glory, and try to build an historic dynasty by hiring the right coaches, navigating all of the different finances, and so much more. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free, playable offline, perfect for flights, and you can get it right now at ultimate-gm.com. Locked On Bengals listeners get a 100% free boost to the franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all capitals. So again, use promo code Locked On and download Ultimate Football GM in the App Store or ultimate-gm.com.
James, I want to ask you a question about Jonah Williams' trade compensation. Just want to quickly note that Lou Anarumo was at the USC Pro Day on Wednesday. Is it Wednesday?
Interesting.
It's Tuesday.
It's
Tuesday.
That's why we didn't get him on Monday, because he was busy traveling, enjoying
right.
that Cali sun.
So the question is on another Locked On show, a new Locked On show. Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino paired up to do the Locked On NFL Scouting show with the draft dudes. They're the draft dudes. And they spent a whole lot of time this week talking about Jonah Williams. They both went and watched some Jonah Williams tape and came up with some trade packages, some trade offers. I think Joe Marino's offer was a 4th-round pick, and Kyle Krabs' offer was a 5th-rounder with a conditional supplemental pick. I don't know if it's a 4th or a 3rd. But a conditional additional pick. Might be another 5th. I don't know. So their justification was essentially that he's been hurt quite a bit, coming off knee surgery, missed his rookie year, played one full season, played really well in that full season. But that's kind of a year behind us now, coming off a knee surgery, a little bit undersized, hasn't quite lived up to that 1st-round pick status, that top 11 pick status. Neither of them have a whole lot of faith in him as a left tackle, which is interesting perspective from external sources. Jonah clearly feels like he's a left tackle, obviously, as we've discussed, and as is reflected in his trade request. Would either of those offers move you if you were running the Cincinnati Bengals?
No, and it won't move the Bengals. I'll tell you that. Now, it does depend a little bit on the conditional pick. Right. If it's a 3rd, then of course you're listening then. But if he's leading with a 5th, I don't think it would be, right? The extra pick be a 3rd. So unless it was a 3rd, and I think the Bengals would want a 2. The more I think about it, wherever you value this guy, I think that the Bengals are going to value him even more than that. And so, look, Jonah Williams, I think, is a solid tackle. But this is the problem when you're a so-so player or you have injury questions and I'm not saying he's being a diva, but then you request a trade. Well, you have flaws. So now every team is looking at those flaws. How many teams actually view Jonah Williams as a left tackle? He's undersized, even if he was perfectly healthy. So there would probably be teams that say, nah, we're not interested. We want our left tackles to be bigger than that. And that'd be it. And so ultimately, my gut is that the Bengals say, no, Jonah, we exercise this 5th-year option. It's guaranteed. We can't restructure it. We can't ask you to take a pay cut. This is not like Joe Mixon. It is a different situation completely. Final year, you're going to play right tackle for us. And I don't think he really has an option. There's been teams, trade him to the Colts or trade him there. Are you sure? Are we sure Chris Ballard would say, yeah, you're going to play left tackle for the Indianapolis Colts? I don't know about that. I'm not buying that necessarily. So, no, I think that I would pass on that deal. And I'm not sure there are many teams lining up to trade for Jonah Williams, period. And so I think he ends up being the Bengals right tackle this season, at least for part of it. And if that's the case, then La'el Collins is probably on the outside looking in. What about you? What do you think about that offer? Would you take either one?
I think if it is draft day or draft day 2, and you've drafted, say, Anton Harrison or Darnell Wright in the first round, then I'm listening pretty hard, because maybe T. Higgins' deal isn't done by then. And suddenly I have $12.5 more million that I can inject into a T. Higgins deal up front to try to get that deal over the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would consider it, is like on draft day.
If you land that franchise right tackle, like in your head. Yes, right. I get that.
Like after the first round, we've got a tackle that we like, that we feel good about, that can compete for the future. I would also feel better, frankly, if they had signed one of those guys in the Cam Fleming bucket.
Is he still out there?
That we talked about. I think he is.
He is.
But there aren't very many guys left in that bucket, especially the higher end part of that bucket. So it's a little bit harder because you don't know where the replacement is. I don't think the replacement is on the roster right now. So they would have to have that on the roster before I felt really good about one of those offers.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's where the Bengals are, because you're right. Let's say their running back situation is unchanged by then, and they'll sign some kind of tight end, but their tight end situation is a little shaky. Of course, they would love a pick of another 4th rounder. It is assuming that you're able to land Jones from Ohio State, DeJuan Jones, or whoever to play tackle. But if you don't do that, who is it? Who's playing tackle? Who makes you feel good? And I just look at it, and I don't really feel good, Jake, about any of their options outside of, and I don't feel great about Jonah, but I wouldn't be concerned about him either, if that makes sense. Like, I think he would be fine at right tackle, which fine at right tackle outside of, half the year from La'el Collins last year is better than what they've had. I
would also feel fine about it, by the way. If Jonah's the right tackle, you feel fine about it. You feel like the offensive line is better, and that makes sense. I also, for the record, agree with you that the Bengals aren't taking a 4th round pick for Jonah Williams.
Nah. Nope. Because
I'd be surprised.
They may be able to, we've talked about comp picks a lot. They might be able to get a 4th or a 5th rounder for him if he plays well just a year later, and they get that stellar play, and it allows them to groom the tackle that they take, maybe not in the 1st round. Mm-hmm. It's the 2nd or 3rd round. And then you're talking about a grooming situation, not necessarily a starting job. So real quick before let's dive into the mailbag, because we haven't really done that yet. Jack, Canadian Bengals super fan, since we were talking about the 1st round. If the Bengals were to select Darnell Washington, Darnell Wright, or Bijan Robinson in the 1st round, which would you be most excited about?
I think that they're all exciting for different reasons. I think Darnell Washington tells you something about the direction they want to take the offense. It involves a heavy, really physical, really high-end specimen of an athlete tight end. I think he's a really fun player. But Darnell Wright and Bijan Robinson seem more interesting to me, more exciting to me. And so that's where my decision is it Darnell Wright or is it Bijan Robinson? Because Bijan Robinson represents a very exciting skill player. Mm-hmm. Darnell Wright represents a guy that should come in and play at right tackle right away with a reasonably high floor, if nothing else. So I would say it's Darnell Wright, just goes right into that trade scenario we talked about. That's where I feel good about trading Jonah Williams, putting that money toward a T. Higgins extension right away, that sort of idea. Mm-hmm. So that's what jumps out at me. But I think Bijan Robinson's pretty close because exciting skill players are pretty exciting.
And that's where I would be, is like from an excitement level, just the idea of the Bengals landing a superstar running back. And that's what a lot of people think Bijan Robinson can be. That would be a little more exciting than Darnell Wright, but Darnell Wright would be exciting because you'd feel like Orlando Brown Jr., Darnell Wright Those are your bookend tackles for the foreseeable future for this window that we've talked about with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So that would be awesome to be able to solve that. So I would put right there. And then Washington, sorry, my man. I know you don't come up third in a lot of athletic scores and things like that, but Darnell Washington would be third on my list. Up next, we'll continue the mailbag. We'll get to a bunch of your questions. But today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to get to FanDuel. They have a no-sweat first bet, up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. You just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you have a same game parlay so you can earn even more money. So you can wager on multiple things in the same game and boom, you can earn more with FanDuel. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Just want to add one more note on the previous question, Darnell Wright, Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson is going to be the guy who's graded higher. That's a positional value thing for me with Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright's going to end up being a first-round player on our board pretty comfortably. Bijan Robinson is probably going to end up being a top 10 graded player on our board. And so that's why it's really close when you're talking running back versus offensive tackle. But if you can get a guy who should be a plug-and-play right tackle at the top or at the back of the first round, I'd feel pretty pleased with that. Now, this kind of ties into our next question here from Mr. Nev, Mr. Irish Red. He wants to talk about the order, which to me is where's the positional value, where is the strength of this draft class of drafting a corner, a tackle, a tight end, and a running back in this year's draft.
Whew. So if it's corner or tackle at 28, there's going to likely be one of those there, and it's some studs that could potentially be there. And so naturally, I would probably say tackle because it's more shallow than corner. And then I'd put corner right there. Tight end and running back, it's deep, but there aren't many Bijan Robinsons, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, you're talking about him to lead the show. Yeah, there are different guys that you could talk about. The kid from Pittsburgh, Abanikanda, is certainly a home run threat, but he's not Gibbs now. And so if I had to rank them, I'd probably go tackle, corner, tight end, running back, because I think you could find tight ends and running backs more likely in the middle rounds. That said, and I just want to preface it this way, take players, not necessarily positions. The sixth best corner might not be better than the best running back. The eighth best tackle you might not want to reach on him if Bijan Robinson is there, or Michael Mayer's there if you're high on him, or insert whoever, Dalton Kincaid. So to me, the player matters just as much as anything. But in general, that's how I would rank them.
I think from a positional value perspective, and you're right that the player matters more. You're not breaking, corner 8 with tight end 1 and picking corner 8 most of the time, unless corner 8 in most years is corner 2. And you're talking about a guy that's a top 10 grade. It's obviously a little bit more complicated, and I think that's fine. But I think his order is pretty good. Corner, right tackle, I mean, that's a 1-1A situation. Right tackle to tackle is probably a slightly more premium need position value matchup for the Bengals, but corners are incredibly valuable. The Bengals do have a need at corner, both long-term, Chidobe Awuzie going into the last year of his deal, and short-term because Awuzie is hurt. And they don't have another starting corner right now to go with Cam Taylor-Britt and Mike Hilton in the slot. So if you could get a starting caliber corner at 28, I wouldn't blink. If they passed on Michael Mayer for a corner at 28, they pass on Bijan for a corner at 28, I wouldn't be shocked. And I probably would be fine with it. Same for tackle. I do think that his tackle, as you said, slightly edging out corner, especially this year where I feel a little bit better about day 2 corners than I feel about day 2 tackles, especially where the Bengals are picking.
Mm-hmm.
Tight end, I am putting ahead of running back because I think after pick 60 this year, and maybe even before pick 60 this year, I'm out of guys that I feel really confident in being a tight end one at some point in their NFL career. And almost undoubtedly there will be a guy drafted in the 3rd or 4th round who will end up being a tight end one because that's the way the position tends to work. But you're really rolling the dice that you're going to find that guy. I could see a huge run on tight ends toward the end of round 1 and throughout round 2. You could see 6 tight ends drafted by the time the Bengals are on the clock for pick 60. And that's where I think you run out of tight ends that you feel really good about being long-term good prospects. And then running back, like you said, James, incredibly deep class at running back. Guys I feel really good about, I think in the 3rd, 4th, maybe even 5th rounds coming in and being able to be a serviceable or better
Deuce Vaughn, baby.
NFL running back. Deuce Vaughn is probably not on that list. I mean, he's a fun player.
Oh,
He can't be a guy that you're asking to come be a bell cow. I don't think. And I think that might be the market the Bengals are looking at in the draft.
Yeah, I thought you were going to continue. Yeah, probably. I think it's unrealistic. You don't need that ball of dynamite to be a bell cow. You need him to be some lightning. You don't need that. He could be the cheetah that gets 8 touches and just runs behind, especially if you draft DeJuan Jones. I'm saying that right?
Yep.
I always get it confused. I don't know why. Certain names of you're rubbing off on me, Jake. But if you draft Jones, then you have him run behind 6'8" Orlando Brown and 6'8" DeJuan Jones, and no one's going to find him. It's perfect. It's oh my gosh, it's
perfect. Yep.
It is. It's perfect.
Nothing else matters except height in the NFL, as we all know.
5'5". That's the way to go. Isn't he 5'5" or something crazy? He might not be 5'5", but
I think it was short. Like one of the shortest players to be at a combine.
He's a freak.
I believe.
Anyways, go ahead.
Deuce Vaughn is the kind of guy you draft if you trade Jonah for like a, 4th and 5th round pick, and you have some extra picks there now. Like you land your DeJuan Jones or Darnell Wright at 28. You trade Jonah after that. You add some picks. And then you double dip at running back and you double dip at tight end.
Which, as of now, I'm not convinced that 4 of their 7 picks, maybe they signed someone, but 4 of their 7 picks wouldn't be running back and tight end. Would not shock me.
Would like them to get more picks is something that I keep coming back to.
I don't think they will double dip at both positions, but it wouldn't shock me. As of today, I think they would double dip at tight end and not running back.
All right.
As of right now today. The good news is it's not the draft is not today.
No, it's March. Next question, Jake Teixeira.
Teixeira.
Yep. That's a baseball player.
That's how I know sports.
Jake _ Teixeira 8. What do you expect the Bengals to do with tight end and cornerback, considering that it seems likely that, in Jake's opinion, not mine, this Jake's, also mine, maybe, the Bengals won't sign a free agent running back at this point. Also, while we're on the topic of names really quickly before you answer that question, D'Amico Ryans, not D'Amico Ryans. I made that mistake yesterday, correcting it now.
There you go. Yeah, D'Amico Ryans. Well, maybe they're going to get D'Amico Ryans to join them to play tight end. He didn't do that when he was in the pros, but he's making a hefty salary with the Texans. No, that said, I think they'll sign a veteran. I took that longer than I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
I think they're going to sign a veteran tight end. And
yes,
is it Foster Moreau or is it Ethan Carter and Drew Sample? Is it Mitch Wilcox and Drew Sample? Is it Jake Fisher? Went back to the joke. Is it not? That part is interesting to me, but I think they'll add someone and then draft someone. Cornerback, probably the same. I think they re-signed someone. Maybe they just re-sign Eli Apple. Maybe they go, with another veteran, someone else. We'll see. Like you said, Lou Anarumo's at USC. But I wouldn't rule out the running back thing either. Let's just wait and see. Never know. The more I think about it, the more Ezekiel Elliott can do what Samaje Perine did. Would he be willing to do that? I don't know. But I think that like he's a really good pass blocker, and he can get you the yards as a check down artist.
He's a great fit for Samaje Perine role,
isn't he? I mean, he's a huge name. And so
we're talking about Ezekiel Elliott, former first-round pick and mega extension signer, to do what Samaje Perine did for the Bengals. And that's the question for him.
He's made his money. Do you want to win a Super Bowl or not, Zeke?
I understand that it might be difficult for him to accept a Samaje Perine role.
I mean, what's his other option?
I don't know, man. I'm just saying, like, that's a big jump for him.
Where would he get drafted in this year's running back class?
He's not. No, he's not. Well, he could pass block. Someone would draft him for his
because of his pass blocking. Why wouldn't you want to go to a place where you're going to be able to catch the ball?
5th round.
A 6th rounder. I think it makes a lot of sense. The Fournette thing, it doesn't, but the Zeke thing, I think it does. And I agree with you. By the way, I don't think Joe Mixon is worse than Leonard Fournette. I'm not saying that. But what the Bengals asked Joe to do, I think you could get 85% of it from Leonard Fournette.
I don't think it's 85%.
Not the same
like
amount.
70%.
Fournette caught 73 passes last year in a bad offense while he was injured.
With Tom Brady, sure.
He was injured.
He was incredibly inexplosive,
They lost all their linemen. It was one of the worst lines in the league.
All right.
No Alex Kappa. Alex Kappa was the franchise, not Tom Brady.
Let's do one more question here really quick before we get out of here. Alex Sardinas at Lex Sardinas. Why is someone talking about Calais Campbell? Is he going to command too much money? He's thinking a 1-year deal for a versatile piece on the defensive line. And we have talked about Calais Campbell, but we haven't talked about him for a while. And he's taking a visit on Tuesday with Atlanta. Is that right?
Yeah, Atlanta.
Good players going to bad teams at this point in free agency.
Calais Campbell makes a ton of sense, and I think he would be pretty low cost in the Bengals. They've already spent a ton of money in the defensive line room, but to me, by the way, that's another option at 28. If the right guy's there, I could see them going D-line. But man, Calais Campbell, you want to talk about another 6'8" guy? Sheesh. You know what I don't want to hear? How Joe Burrow's worried about Calais Campbell again. And he won't have to do that if he goes to Atlanta, but
yeah,
who knows where he goes? I want him to come to Cincinnati. That would be one of those under-the-radar signings that could pay off in a playoff game.
Calais Campbell's a defensive line veteran that I like. I would not be opposed at all to a 1-year deal for Calais Campbell.
I wonder how they could free up more space to add guys like Calais Campbell.
Well, we talked about that 2 days ago on the Locked On Bengals podcast. If you would like to go check that episode out, we spent a whole segment 2, I believe, 2 days ago's show on the salary cap, resetting the salary cap, what it looks like now, including Cody Ford's deal. My guess was pretty accurate. Cody Ford has a net cap hit around $300,000 because he pushes somebody else off of the top 53 salary cap counting. So if you're interested in finding out where the Bengals are currently from a cap situation beyond just the over the cap number, which misrepresents their true cap flexibility at this point in the offseason, go check that out. And we'll wait here for the Bengals to make a move. If there's any night for it, I think it's tonight, James. And if you've listened to our last couple episodes, you would know why. Until next time, Bengals fans, we'll be back with you if the Bengals make a move.
Good luck.
Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.